The silence was heavy, almost oppressive, as Ethan's footsteps echoed through the grand halls of Margaret's mansion. The ornate chandeliers above shimmered faintly in the dim light, casting long shadows on the walls. His gaze wandered over the luxurious furnishings, yet amidst the modern decor, one piece stood out, a weathered antique desk tucked into a quiet corner of the study. "What's this doing here?" Ethan murmured to himself, his curiosity sparked. The desk, with its intricate carvings in aged wood, seemed oddly out of place. Approaching the desk, Ethan ran his fingers over the surface, tracing the delicate patterns etched into the wood. As he opened a drawer, a faint creak broke the silence. He paused, narrowing his eyes. Something about the sound was off. Sliding his hand further along the edges, his fingers brushed against an uneven groove. A slight push revealed a hidden latch. His pulse quickened as a compartment popped open with a soft click. Inside lay a bundle of dusty papers and a single photograph, edges curled with age. Ethan gently picked up the photograph, brushing off the thin layer of dust. The image was unmistakable. A young woman with radiant eyes and a wide smile cradling a baby. She looked vibrant, full of life, and yet familiar. His breath caught. "Margaret," he whispered aloud, staring in disbelief. It was her. Decades younger, but undeniably her. He turned the photograph over, hoping for a clue. The back was blank. Shock coursed through him. His heart pounded as he tried to make sense of what he was holding. How could Margaret, the composed, enigmatic woman he had come to know, hold a secret like this? She had never mentioned a child. Why would she hide something so significant? The questions piled up, each one louder than the last. Who was the baby? What had happened to them? And why had Margaret locked away this part of her life in the shadows of an old desk? The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Ethan's eyes darted around the study, noticing details he had previously ignored: the fading paint, the musty smell of forgotten time. The ornate walls and antique furniture seemed to close in, whispering secrets he couldn't yet understand. The weight of the discovery pressed down on him. The opulence of the mansion, once a symbol of Margaret's wealth and grace, now felt haunting, like it was keeping watch over stories long buried. His gaze returned to the photograph, lingering on the baby's innocent face. Who were they? He wondered again. He thought about the life this child might have led, the dreams Margaret might have had for them, and the pain she must have endured to keep this hidden. Why had she chosen silence? With all her wealth, wisdom, and poise, why had this story remained locked away? The questions gnawed at him, relentless. Looking around, Ethan felt as though the mansion itself was alive. The walls seemed to hum with untold stories, the furniture standing as silent witnesses to a life lived in pieces. Every creak of the floor and groan of the wood carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Clutching the photograph tightly, a chilling thought crossed Ethan's mind. Was his life with Margaret built on a foundation of lies? His chest tightened as the possibility loomed. The answers he sought now felt less like curiosities and more like necessities. They could change everything: his marriage, his trust, his understanding of the woman he thought he knew. As the camera pans to the photograph, the voiceover begins. What Ethan found in this mansion would change everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and destiny. The words linger, heavy and foreboding, as the scene fades to black. The scene opens on Ethan's modest, cluttered room. The light of a single lamp illuminates his textbooks, scattered papers, and an alarm clock showing 2:00 a.m. His mother's soft cough echoes from the adjacent room. Ethan rubs his tired eyes, forcing himself to focus on the page in front of him. His laptop screen flickers weakly, showing an online lecture paused mid-sentence. His hands tremble slightly as he types, his determination outweighing the exhaustion creeping over him. Just one more section, he whispers to himself, as if the words alone could keep him going. In the background, a kettle whistles. He pushes himself up from the desk, heading to the kitchen. The shelves are sparsely stocked, with instant coffee packets and bread as the main staples. He quickly pours a cup, glancing at the pile of bills on the counter. A sharp pain of worry flickers in his eyes, but he shakes it off, forcing himself to return to his desk. Ethan steps into the dim morning light, wearing a threadbare jacket and carrying a heavy backpack. The bustling street is alive with people hurrying to work, yet it feels lonely. His destination, a small diner where he waits tables before heading to his classes. The manager greets him with a curt nod. Ethan doesn't mind. He's here to do his job, and that's all that matters. Balancing trays and serving customers, he works with quiet efficiency. Despite his exhaustion, a faint smile remains on his face. He greets regulars warmly, drawing energy from their kind words. One customer remarks, "Kid, you got drive. Don't lose that." Ethan nods, holding on to the compliment like a lifeline. Little do they know, his dreams of a better life aren't just for him. They're for the frail woman waiting for him at home. Later that night, Ethan sits beside his mother, her hand resting gently on his. She looks at him with tired but proud eyes. "You'll make it, Ethan," she says softly, her voice trembling with conviction. "You're stronger than this world gives you credit for." He nods, though doubt lingers in his heart. "I'll try, Mom. For us." Days blur into nights, and Ethan's routine continues. His peers question his efforts, some even mock his dreams. "Why waste your time? People like us don't make it," one says. Ethan ignores the comments, though they sting. Every rejection letter he receives for scholarships and internships feels like a brick added to the weight on his shoulders. Yet, he refuses to let despair win. "I'll show them," he murmurs under his breath one evening, staring at the city lights from his small apartment window. "I'll show them what determination can do." Ethan's life takes an unexpected turn when he accepts a job as a waiter at a lavish charity gala. Walking into the grand venue, he feels completely out of place. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light across the marble floors, and elegantly dressed guests chat over champagne. Ethan, in his plain uniform, keeps his head down and focuses on his work. As he navigates the room, he spots a woman seated quietly in the corner. She is unlike the other guests, who are loud and boisterous. Her demeanor is calm, her gaze thoughtful. This is Margaret. Margaret's presence at the gala sparks whispers among the crowd. "That's her, Margaret Alcat," someone murmurs. "She hardly ever shows up to these things anymore. Do you think she's here for the donations?" "No, I heard she just likes to observe. Keeps to herself. Can't blame her after everything she's been through." Margaret hears every word, but her face remains serene. She sips her drink slowly, observing the room with a quiet detachment that comes from years of enduring loss. Back at her grand mansion, Margaret reflects on her life. Surrounded by opulence, she feels the weight of emptiness. "All this," she murmurs, looking at the ornate paintings and fine china, and it still doesn't fill the silence. She picks up a photograph of her late husband, her fingers brushing lightly over the frame. Loneliness clings to her, despite the wealth that others envy. At the gala, Ethan approaches Margaret's table to serve her a glass of water. Their eyes meet briefly, and in that moment, Margaret sees something in him: determination, vulnerability, and perhaps a reflection of her own struggles. "What's your name?" she asks, her voice kind yet reserved. "Ethan," he replies, surprised by the question. "Ethan Carter. You work hard, don't you?" she continues, her eyes never leaving his. He hesitates before nodding. "I try. It's all I can do." Margaret offers a faint smile. Sometimes trying is enough. The brief exchange stays with Ethan, though he doesn't fully understand why. For the first time in a long while, he feels seen. To the astonishment of everyone present, Margaret later extends an invitation to Ethan. "I'd like you to come work for me," she says, her tone leaving no room for doubt. The crowd erupts in murmurs. "Why him? What's so special about a waiter?" Ethan, equally stunned, hesitates. I don't understand. Why me?" Margaret's answer is simple yet profound. "Because you remind me of someone I used to know, and I believe you deserve a chance." Ethan wrestles with the offer. Skepticism and curiosity battle within him. Is this some kind of test, or just charity? He wonders aloud in the privacy of his room. Yet the possibility of a better life for him and his mother is too compelling to ignore. Their connection becomes the talk of the town. "He's just using her," some say. "She must have an angle," others whisper. Ethan feels the judgment keenly but presses forward. Margaret, for her part, remains unfazed, her calm composure shielding her from the noise. Together, they begin to find solace in each other's company, a bond forming amidst the chaos. As the days turn into weeks, Ethan begins to see Margaret not as a benefactor but as a person, a woman who has lived through trials he can only imagine. In her quiet wisdom, he finds guidance. In his youthful determination, she finds hope. Ethan stepped out of the corner store, clutching a small bag of essentials. The whispers started almost immediately. A group of women near the entrance exchanged glances, their voices low but sharp enough to cut through the air. There he is. Married her for her money, no doubt. Can you blame him? It's not like he has much else going on. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept walking. He had heard it all before. Strangers, acquaintances, even people he had once considered friends. All of them quick to judge, none of them willing to understand. The sting of their words stayed with him, following him like a shadow as he made his way back to the mansion. Later that evening, Ethan sat at his mother's bedside, her frail hand resting in his. The room smelled of antiseptic, the soft hum of medical equipment filling the silence. She looked at him with tired but loving eyes. "You've done so much for me, Ethan," she said weakly. "You shouldn't have to carry all of this alone." "It's not a choice, Mom," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "I can't lose you. I'll do whatever it takes." He glanced at the stack of bills on the nightstand, their presence a constant reminder of how close they were to losing everything. Margaret's help had been a lifeline, but it came at a cost, one he wasn't sure he could keep paying. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself wrestling with guilt. Sitting alone in the mansion's study one evening, he stared at his reflection in the darkened window. "What kind of man marries for money?" he whispered to himself. His own voice felt like an accusation. He thought of his mother, of her fragile condition and the sacrifices she had made for him. He thought of Margaret, of her kindness and the weight she carried in silence. The guilt gnawed at him, but so did the fear of losing everything. Every decision he made seemed to pull him further into a moral storm, where no choice felt entirely right. One afternoon, Ethan ran into an old friend at the local market. At first, it seemed like a pleasant encounter, but the conversation quickly turned sour. "So, you're living the good life now, huh?" his friend said, forcing a smile. "Must be nice, marrying into wealth." "You don't understand," Ethan replied, his voice firm but controlled. "It's not like that." His friend scoffed. "Sure it's not. Just remember, people don't forget things like this." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. As the friend walked away, Ethan stood frozen, his dignity bruised but his resolve unbroken. He reminded himself that explanations were pointless. Actions would have to speak louder than words. Back at the mansion, Ethan found a moment of quiet in the garden. The setting sun bathed the world in gold, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. He took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. "This has to mean something," he murmured. "It can't all be for nothing." For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of clarity. Maybe this struggle wasn't a punishment, but a test. A chance to prove to himself that he was stronger than the doubt surrounding him. He clenched his fist, his resolve solidifying like steel. "I'll get through this," he said aloud, the words carried away by the gentle breeze. For her, for Mom, for me. The mansion loomed in the evening light, its shadows stretching far beyond the iron gates. Ethan stood in the entryway, gazing at the grand staircase that spiraled upward into the unknown. The air inside was cool, carrying a faint scent of wood polish and something older, less definable. He felt dwarfed by the vastness of the house. Every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind through the windows seemed purposeful, as though the mansion itself was alive, holding secrets in every corner. As Ethan wandered the halls, his eyes were drawn to certain doors, solid oak with ornate carvings, each one locked. His hand lingered on the handle of one, testing its firmness. It didn't budge. He noticed Margaret watching from the far end of the hall, her expression unreadable. "What's behind these doors?" he asked, his tone casual, though curiosity burned beneath the surface. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with," she replied softly before turning away. Her dismissal only fueled his unease. The locked room seemed to guard more than just forgotten furniture. They felt like sentinels of a life deliberately hidden. One evening, while searching for a book in the library, Ethan stumbled upon an old chest tucked beneath a heavy curtain. Dust motes danced in the air as he knelt to open it. Inside, he found a collection of items that seemed out of place in a pristine mansion. Yellowed photographs, letters tied with frayed ribbon, and a small velvet pouch containing antique jewelry. He held one of the photographs closer. It was Margaret, unmistakably younger, standing beside a man with a serious expression. They appeared happy, though there was something restrained in their smiles. Turning the photograph over, he found no name or date, just a faint smudge where something had been written and later erased. The letters were more puzzling. He unfolded one carefully. The ink faded, but legible. The words hinted at a profound loss, though the details were frustratingly vague. Ethan's mind raced with questions. Who was the man in the photograph? Why had Margaret kept these items hidden? Each discovery deepened the mystery. Margaret's behavior grew more unpredictable in the days that followed. At times, she was warm, sharing small moments of tenderness that surprised Ethan. But there were also stretches of silence, her gaze distant as if she were somewhere else entirely. One afternoon, Ethan found her sitting by the window, staring out at the garden. Her hands rested in her lap, a book forgotten beside her. Margaret, he began, hesitant. That chest in the library, those photographs, who were they? She looked at him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't place, sorrow, perhaps, or something deeper. But she said nothing. After a long pause, she rose from the chair and left the room. Ethan was left standing there, his question unanswered, her silence heavy. The groundskeeper, an elderly man named Harris, had worked on the estate for decades. Ethan caught him one morning near the greenhouse, trimming back an overgrowth of vines. "Harris, can I ask you something?" Ethan said, his voice low. Harris paused, looking up with a knowing glint in his eyes. "About Margaret, I assume." Ethan nodded. "Do you know anything about her past? There's so much she doesn't talk about." Harris hesitated, his hands gripping the shears tightly. "Some stories," he began slowly, "are better left untold. You might not like what you find." The cryptic warning sent a chill through Ethan. He wanted to press further, but Harris had already turned back to his work, its silence as impenetrable as Margaret's. The mansion grew heavier with each passing day, the weight of its secrets pressing down on Ethan. He couldn't ignore the clues anymore. Every glance at the locked doors, every dusty photograph, and every unspoken word from Margaret felt like a piece of a puzzle he was meant to solve. He sat alone in the library one night, the dim light of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The faint ticking of a clock was the only sound as he spread the photographs and letters before him. He traced the edges of each with his fingers, searching for meaning. "Why won't she tell me?" he whispered to himself. "What's she so afraid of?" The thought lingered, heavy and unresolved, as he leaned back in the chair. The mansion's silence seemed to hum with anticipation, as if it knew the answers Ethan sought would come. But at a cost he wasn't yet ready to face. The room was bathed in soft evening light, and the quiet crackle of the fireplace filled the silence. Ethan sat across from Margaret, watching her as she gazed into the flames. There was something different about her tonight, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "I wasn't always like this, you know," Margaret said suddenly, breaking the stillness. Her voice was soft, almost wistful. "There was a time when I was much like you, young, full of ambition, carrying dreams I thought were unbreakable." Ethan leaned forward, curious. "What happened?" Margaret smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both joy and sorrow. "Life. It has a way of testing you, shaping you into someone you don't always recognize. I lost someone I thought I couldn't live without, but I did, I had to." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time, Ethan saw past her wealth and composure to the pain she carried. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan," she added. "Don't let this world make you forget who you are." Ethan didn't know how to respond, but something shifted inside him. Margaret's words, her story, they felt like a mirror reflecting his own struggles, his own resilience. Over the following weeks, Margaret began sharing more of her life with Ethan. Each story was a window into her past, times of joy, heartbreak, and lessons learned through hardship. She spoke of her late husband, a man she had loved deeply, and the challenges they had faced together. She spoke of the choices she had made, some good, others that haunted her. Every decision shapes you, Ethan, she said one afternoon as they walked through the garden. But it's how you carry those choices that defines you. Regret is heavy, but hope can lift you, even in the darkest times. Ethan listened intently, absorbing her words like a sponge. He began to see Margaret not as a benefactor, but as a survivor, a woman who had weathered life's storms and come out stronger. Her stories challenged his cynicism, planting seeds of hope he hadn't felt in years. Their bond deepened, built on shared moments and quiet understanding. Margaret's resilience inspired Ethan, and his determination reminded her of the person she had once been. Despite their differences in age and background, they found common ground in their struggles and dreams. One evening, as they sat on the terrace watching the sunset, Margaret turned to Ethan. "You've been carrying so much, haven't you?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "It feels like I'm trying to hold everything together, but it's all slipping through my fingers." Margaret placed a hand on his. "You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone. Remember that." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that stayed with Ethan long after the sun had set. The mansion, with its endless rooms and long, winding halls, held an air of mystery that Ethan couldn't ignore. One door in particular caught his attention, a heavy wooden door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. It was always locked, and Margaret seemed to avoid that part of the house entirely. Curiosity gnawed at him. One day, he asked her directly, "What's behind it?" Margaret's expression darkened. "It's nothing important," she said curtly, turning away. Her reaction only deepened his intrigue. Ethan's questions led him to Harris, the elderly groundskeeper who had worked on the estate for decades. They stood by the greenhouse one morning, the scent of freshly turned earth filling the air. "Harris, what do you know about that locked room?" Ethan asked. Harris paused, his hands stilling on the spade. "That room's been locked longer than I've been here," he said finally. "Whatever's inside, it's not my place to say. But some stories are better left alone, lad. Sometimes the truth doesn't bring peace, it brings pain." The cryptic warning sent a chill through Ethan. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lay behind that door was tied to the shadows in Margaret's eyes. Ethan's exploration of the mansion led him to the library, a sprawling room filled with shelves that stretched to the ceiling. One afternoon, as he scanned the rows of books, something caught his eye, a small chest tucked into the corner, half hidden beneath a dusty curtain. Inside, he found journals, letters, and photographs. Each item felt like a piece of a puzzle, offering glimpses into Margaret's past. One photograph, in particular, stopped him cold. It was a picture of a young Margaret holding a baby. The joy on her face was undeniable, but the image raised more questions than it answered. When Ethan confronted Margaret with the photograph, her reaction was immediate. She snatched it from his hands, her face pale. "Where did you find this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "In the library," Ethan replied. "Margaret, who is this child?" For a moment, she looked as though she might answer, but then she turned away, her shoulders slumping. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. "Some things are better left in the past." Ethan felt a surge of frustration. "It matters to me," he said. "I want to understand." But Margaret said nothing more, leaving him with only the photograph and a growing sense of unease. As Margaret's health began to decline, she grew more introspective. One evening, she sat with Ethan in the sitting room, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft but steady, "there's something I need to tell you. I'm sick. The doctors, they've given me months, maybe less." Ethan felt the weight of her words like a blow. "Margaret, he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I don't want your pity," she said firmly. "I've made my peace with it. But I need you to understand. Our marriage, it wasn't just about you. It was about me too. I needed closure, a chance to feel less alone." Her confession left Ethan reeling. He had always known their relationship was unconventional, but hearing her speak so openly about her pain made him see her in a new light. Margaret's illness revealed layers of regret she had kept buried for years. She spoke in fragments, her words hinting at a loss that had shaped her life. "There are things I wish I could change," she said one evening. "Choices I made, people I hurt, but it's too late for that now." Ethan wanted to press her for details, but he could see the pain in her eyes. Instead, he made a silent promise to uncover the truth, not just for her, but for himself. The hallway was eerily quiet as Ethan approached the locked room, the heavy key trembling in his hand. Margaret was in the hospital, her presence hauntingly absent from the mansion. The door loomed before him, its intricate carving seeming to watch him as he slid the key into the lock. The mechanism clicked, the sound echoing through the silence. Ethan hesitated, his pulse racing. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, carrying the scent of forgotten time. Dust motes swirled in the dim light filtering through the curtains. The room was filled with boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, and shelves stacked with memories waiting to be uncovered. Ethan's eyes were drawn to a small chest in the corner. Kneeling, he opened it carefully, revealing a collection of letters tied with faded ribbons. His hands trembled as he picked up the first envelope, the ink smudged but still legible. The letters were addressed to someone named James. Unfolding the paper, Ethan began to read. Margaret's words were raw, filled with longing and sorrow. She had written to her estranged son for decades, apologizing for her decisions, begging for forgiveness, and expressing her unwavering love. Ethan's throat tightened as he read the pain etched into every word. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," one letter read, "but please know that I have never stopped loving you, not for a single moment." Each letter painted a picture of a mother's unyielding hope and guilt, her attempts to reach a son who had been taken from her life. Ethan could feel the weight of her regret, her sorrow seeping through the pages. Amid the letters, Ethan found a photograph tucked away. It was another image of Margaret, younger and full of life, holding a baby in her arms. Her smile was radiant, but her eyes carried a hint of sadness. The child in the photo seemed vaguely familiar, a face Ethan couldn't immediately place but felt he had seen before. He stared at the image, his mind racing. Who was this child? Could it be the same son she had written about in the letters? And why had Margaret kept this hidden from him? The questions churned in his mind, each one pressing harder than the last. Further digging revealed a set of legal documents, including Margaret's will. As Ethan scanned the pages, his eyes widened in disbelief. She had named him her sole heir, not because of their marriage, but because of the qualities she saw in him. The words on the page felt heavy. "To Ethan Carter, a man of integrity and kindness, who reminds me of the strength and compassion I once saw in my son." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Margaret's choice wasn't about wealth or obligation, it was about trust. She had seen something in him, something that connected her to a love she thought she had lost forever. As Ethan pieced together the letters, photographs, and documents, the story began to unfold. Margaret had spent her entire life searching for her son, pouring her heart into every attempt to find him. The failures had taken their toll, shaping her into the woman he had come to know, guarded, resilient, and endlessly kind. Ethan felt a pang of sorrow. The locked room wasn't just a place for old belongings. It was a shrine to a life she had never stopped longing for, a chapter she had desperately tried to rewrite. Sitting in the room, surrounded by Margaret's memories, Ethan felt a wave of emotions crash over him. Her pain was palpable, her resilience awe-inspiring. He thought of the times he had doubted her motives, the times he had questioned their relationship. "I was so wrong," he whispered, his voice trembling. Margaret wasn't just a benefactor or a companion. She was a woman who had endured unimaginable loss and had still chosen to give him a chance. Regret gnawed at him as he reflected on his own choices. He had seen their marriage as a solution to his problems, a way out of his struggles. But now he understood it had been so much more. Margaret had believed in him when no one else had, and he owed her far more than he had ever realized. With the letters and photograph in hand, Ethan made a decision. His dreams could wait. Margaret had given him a gift far greater than material wealth. She had shown him the power of connection and compassion. Now it was his turn to honor her. "I'll find him," he murmured to himself. "I'll do this for her, for everything she gave me." For the first time in months, Ethan felt clarity. Margaret's story had shifted his perspective, reminding him that life wasn't just about success or survival. It was about the bonds we create, the legacies we leave behind. He thought of his own mother, of Margaret, of the people who had shaped him. They had all taught him the same lesson. Love and kindness were the greatest treasures a person could hold. The next morning, Ethan packed a small bag. He stood in the doorway of the mansion, the letters and photograph tucked safely inside. As he looked back at the house, he felt a surge of determination. This journey wasn't just about finding Margaret's son. It was about finding closure, healing wounds, and bridging the gap that had been left open for far too long. He stepped out into the morning light, the path ahead uncertain but full of purpose. Margaret's voice echoed in his mind. "You're stronger than you know." And for the first time, Ethan believed it. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the clock on the mantel. Ethan sat across from Margaret's son James, his hands folded nervously. It had taken weeks to find him, weeks of combing through records and making countless calls. Now they were here, face to face. "You're sure she wants to see me?" James asked, his voice cautious but tinged with hope. "After all these years?" Ethan nodded. She'd never stopped hoping, not for a single day. When they entered Margaret's hospital room, the air seemed to shift. Margaret, frail but alert, turned her head, her eyes filled with tears as they locked onto James. "Mom," James said softly, his voice breaking. Margaret reached out a trembling hand, her face lighting up with a mix of joy and regret. "James, my boy." The room became a sanctuary of healing as words long left unsaved flowed between them. Apologies, forgiveness, and love filled the space, bridging the gap of years lost. For the first time in decades, Margaret's heart felt whole. A week later, Margaret lay surrounded by Ethan and James. The hospital room, once cold and sterile, now felt warm with their presence. She looked at Ethan, her expression calm. "You gave me more than I ever thought I could have," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You brought him back to me." Ethan grasped her hand gently. "You gave me more, Margaret. You showed me what it means to truly care." Margaret smiled, her breathing slowing. With her son's hand in one and Ethan's in the other, she closed her eyes, her heart finally at peace. She passed away quietly, leaving behind a legacy of love and redemption. In the days following Margaret's passing, Ethan found himself reflecting on her life and the lessons she had taught him. He used her inheritance to settle his mother's medical bills, a weight he had carried for so long finally lifted. With the rest, he began building a future, not just for himself, but for others. Margaret's name became synonymous with hope as Ethan established a foundation to support students who, like him, faced overwhelming challenges. He dedicated it to her memory, ensuring her generosity would continue to touch lives. The foundation grew quickly, helping young people achieve dreams that once felt impossible. Ethan poured himself into the work, using his own experiences to guide and mentor others. He became a figure of quiet strength, a man whose life was redefined by compassion. Sitting in his modest office one evening, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. Margaret's influence had transformed his life. He thought about her resilience, her unyielding hope, and the kindness she had shown him when he needed it most. "Life isn't about what you take," he murmured to himself. "It's about what you give back." The story of Margaret and Ethan resonated far beyond their small circle. People who heard it were inspired by their connection, by the way love and understanding had bridged the gap between their vastly different worlds. Ethan often shared the tale, not as a story of loss, but as a testament to the power of empathy. Ethan thought back to the moment he met Margaret, a stranger who had become so much more. Their relationship wasn't conventional, but it taught him the true meaning of love. Love that nurtures, heals, and leaves a lasting legacy. Years later, Margaret's story continued to inspire. Her life was a reminder that kindness, even in the smallest acts, could change the world. Through Ethan's work, her spirit lived on, encouraging others to look beyond themselves and make a difference. The camera pans over a serene sunrise, its golden rays breaking through the clouds and casting light on a quiet landscape. A soft, reflective voice begins. Life doesn't often give us second chances, but when it does, it's up to us to seize them, to rewrite the stories we thought were already finished. What would you do if life handed you a second chance? Would you mend a broken relationship, chase a dream you left behind, or simply take a moment to appreciate the blessings you already have? The voice pauses, leaving room for reflection as images of people embracing, laughing, and overcoming challenges flash across the screen. Take a moment, think about it. The power to change begins with the smallest step. Reflection can be the key to transformation. The tone shifts slightly, becoming warmer, more inviting. Every one of us has a story to tell, a moment that changed us, a challenge that shaped us, or a victory we never thought we could achieve. Share your story in the comments below. You never know who you might inspire, whose life you might touch with your words. The screen shows a diverse group of people typing on laptops and phones, their faces lighting up with emotion as they connect with others. The music swells softly, adding a sense of hope and togetherness. This story is just one of many that remind us of life's unexpected twists. But these twists don't define us. It's how we rise from them, how we learn, and how we move forward that truly matters. Let's continue the conversation. What lessons has life taught you? What wisdom can you pass on to others? The scene transitions to a small group of people gathered in a cozy room, sharing their stories, their voices filled with emotion and hope. The focus sharpens on a single figure, smiling warmly as they look directly into the camera. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to join a community that believes in the power of human connection. Together, we can explore more stories that uplift, inspire, and resonate deeply. Let's make this a space where we celebrate life's beauty, even in its hardest moments. A montage of shared moments, people helping one another, overcoming challenges, and finding joy fills the screen, creating a sense of unity. The camera returns to the sunrise, now fully illuminating the landscape. The voice softens, ending on a note of encouragement. Every story has the power to inspire change. Yours, mine, ours. Together, they can light the way for others. Let's keep sharing. Let's keep learning. And let's keep reminding ourselves that hope is always within reach. The screen fades to black, leaving viewers with a simple, powerful message. Inspiration starts here. What will you do with your second chance?